Hi friends, welcome to episode 10 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian for now 12 years, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that'll help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. Election Day this past week was our district professional development. Our schools are used as polling stations, and I've asked why churches haven't been used instead, and the explanation I've always been given by voters much older than myself was, well, that's the way we've always been doing our voting. My hope is that one day Election Day becomes a holiday because anybody with school-age children in our district ends up taking off the day or scrambling for childcare. And until this election, voters in Michigan couldn't decide just to vote absentee. In other words, we couldn't vote in advance of the actual day. This week, voters supported an initiative to allow for no excuse absentee voting. But until that passed, in order to vote absentee, you either had to be 60 years or older, unable to vote without assistance, expecting to be out of town on Election Day, you might be in jail awaiting arraignment, or unable to attend the polls due to religious reasons, or you were working as an election inspector in a precinct outside of your residence. Needless to say, I'm very grateful that in future professional development days, the teachers won't be scrambling to also fit in voting as well as attending a full day of PD. So I spent Election Day teaching sessions to my peers. Everyone in our district had the opportunity to volunteer to teach, and then, once a catalog of classes was ready, the entire district registered and created, in theory, a schedule of PD which was tailored to their own needs and interests, factoring in their grade level and the subjects they taught. Some departments used this time to work on curriculum teams. However, for the most part, these sessions were opportunities to share teaching strategies, explore technology updates, address concerns regarding student issues, classroom challenges, and also get our flu shots. My first two sessions were nothing unusual. In the first, I shared out Google Drive resources from a conference I had attended. In the second session, I taught Google Draw. This is my all-time favorite platform for creating. The challenge with teaching any type of technology session is to identify a Goldilocks zone with your audience, finding the just right, rather than being too basic and introductory, as opposed to teaching with a presumed level of comfort and familiarity, which, in the case of Google Drive and tools for educators. I will address this in greater detail in an upcoming episode on librarians as lifelong learners. In preparing for my own sessions, it occurred to me that there's an inherent arrogance when it comes to teaching adults. Over the past 20 years, I've taught children of all ages, and I've had a rather parental attitude when my audience is comprised of children. As the only adult in the room, I can safely assume that I am teaching what I know to be in the student's best interest. This is especially true when I am teaching digital citizenship lessons on cyberbullying and plagiarism, copyright, fair use, and especially research skills. So in preparing for my third session, Research Like a Librarian, the difference is my entire premise is that, as the librarian in the room, my research strategies, whatever they may be, are better than the classroom teacher sitting in front of me. I'll attach this presentation in my show notes. Ironically, I focused on exactly the same strategies I use when I teach their students. The difference is that the adults in this room would already have established approaches to research, and I'm challenging their past and most likely their current practices when they teach their own students. The Google slideshow I use begins with a caveat, an advance warning that I am a very opinionated librarian. But aren't we all? And as women oftentimes do, I apologize for offending anybody in advance. There are only a few slides in this slideshow because it's just the rationale for my strategies. I never miss an opportunity to blast Wikipedia. I show them the disclaimer page, something which requires a little more explanation when I show it to my 4th and 5th graders. Adults full know the significance of the page when I ask them, is this really where our students should go for their research? I remind everybody that our students' safety is paramount, and when guiding their research, the research must always be safe because our filters that we use are flawed, that our research must always be age-appropriate and free of ads or pop-ups. Furthermore, I explain to the teachers that their research needs to use authoritative resources. And when I explain this to the children, I explain that we want information from experts, not yahoos. Yahoos are people who don't know what they're talking about. I also emphasize the importance of finding accurate information and current information. And while this is not news to anyone who has a library science degree, I was addressing classroom teachers. What then follows is me navigating our library resource page using Gale and EBSCO databases, online encyclopedias such as World Book and Britannica, as well as ebooks. Never leaving this resource page, I emphasize that 100% of our students' research needs can be accomplished without resorting to Googling everything. I realize that without this day of PD, the only way to convey these research strategies to my teachers is through my students, in much the same way I try to teach the parents of my students. Using our students as disseminators of our teaching objectives is a common one employed by teachers for all grades. And I've had limited success giving short demonstrations during staff meetings, but 10 minutes is hardly sufficient, and the result is me speaking at a near frantic pace in order to cram as much as I can into my allotted time. I feel I'm on a worthy crusade, and I will continue to persevere. Join me today as we tackle the issue of leveled books, a necessary evil. A commonly found definition of a necessary evil is something bad that must exist or occur in order for something good to happen. And I feel leveled books, albeit well-intentioned, take the wonder and exploration out of looking for a book to read. This process becomes formulaic, and the emphasis becomes one of searching for a student's color code or a designated letter, rather than a genuine interest in a book, the cover, the content, or illustrations. In preparing for this episode, I wondered about level books affecting us directly, when our own libraries are leveled, and indirectly, when we support the classroom libraries, which are oftentimes leveled, and students who come to the library having learned to look for a corresponding letter or sticker when selecting their library books. My very first library was thoroughly stickered with these color-coded AR levels on the spine. The corresponding test numbers had been painstakingly handwritten on each spine. By the time I came around, AR was transitioning from a per-test fee to a yearly subscription, which, compared to the $1.49 tests that I purchased, which weren't many, was untenable. The thousands of dollars just wasn't in the budget, and we would be allowed to continue to access the tests we had purchased in the past, but that access wouldn't be guaranteed for much longer. As a brand new librarian, I didn't question the previous practice, but rather maintained that which was ongoing and did my best to reassure the staff that I would not undo whatever successful programming my predecessor had started. I reflected on my own AR experience as I researched for episode number 6, Classroom Libraries, Rivals or Partners, when an elementary principal seemingly abruptly severed ties with Accelerated Reader and diverted some of this found money to support classroom libraries. Principal Jim Bailey said in his article for the Nerdy Book Club blog, quote, "We started by kicking Accelerated Reader to the curb. This program was costing our school over $2,000 every single year. Goodbye low-level comprehension tests. Goodbye trinkets and prize incentives to read. Goodbye reading books, quote, only on AR, unquote. Goodbye punishing kids for not reaching their stupid goal. Hello, classroom libraries, end quote. Pernille Ripp is a teacher and author of 4 books, including one titled Passionate Readers, The Art of Reaching and Engaging Every Child, which was published in August 2017. I will preface this by saying I have not read this book, but it is on an increasingly growing list of professional books I aim to read. In a blog post titled After Accelerated Reader, dated August 23, 2018, Pernille Ripp contemplated a classroom without AR. She provides alternative activities and assessments to use in your classroom, which, above all, foster a love of reading in our students. I'll include a link in the show notes. I was aware that public libraries didn't level their children's collection, but until I spent time in a school library outside of my own, I had presumed AR was standard practice in all school libraries. I was relieved to find my next library assignment did not use AR or any spine leveling label. It didn't solve the problem, though, when I had a student come to me for an LMN book. I asked her to repeat her book title, and she said, I need an LMN book. My desire to support my student and impress the building reading specialist that this newly hired librarian wanted to collaborate required that I do my research in advance and pull titles which were designated L's, M's, and N's and put them in an assembled pile for when this student's class came for their library lessons and book checkout. Admittedly, if your library collection has an I Can Read designated area, you, like me, have leveled books in your library. Guilty. These books have a 1 or a 2 or a 3 on the spine and are always set apart in my libraries. These books don't have quite a large following, but as I will discuss in an upcoming episode on the organization of our libraries, location of these books has a lot to do with student traffic and resulting checkouts. The 1, 2, or 3 displayed on the cover may be useful for some students in selecting books to read, but broadcasting one's reading level with a number isn't a point of pride. Students like to show off their chapter books. Nobody likes to show off their I Can Read books. There are some noted exceptions. In some libraries, I've noticed that the Mo Willems Elephant and Piggy books, as well as the subsequent titles, are shelved with the I Can Read books. Another way to attract readers to this shelf is to include Ted Arnold's Fly Guy books and Shannon Hale's Princess in Black, along with the 1s, the 2s, and the 3 books. I haven't chosen to purchase any specific I Can Read designated books. I have most recently replaced all my Frog and Toad books in this section with fresh copies. Every once in a while, a suggestion at a staff meeting is made that our students' reading test scores should be shared with the building staff who would benefit from knowing this information. While this might on some level seem useful to a school librarian, internalizing this information for 320 or so students, let alone the students in my 3 other buildings I service, quickly becomes unlikely. What makes more sense is to help my students learn how to find the books in our library, or the public library, or the bookstore where they are shopping that would best suit them, their interests, and their reading ability. I fall squarely into the camp of school librarians who hope to guide their students to the just right book. As I explained in episode number 4, Book Warden, I feel justified in this decision because it is a strategy that is used by my classroom teachers throughout the elementary schools. Worth mentioning at this point is an excellent one that was raised by Kiera Parrott in her American Association of School Libraries article titled, Thinking Outside the Bin, Why Labeling Books by Reading Level Disempowers Young Readers. and that is the ALA's position statement on labeling books with reading levels. Quote, "It is the responsibility of school librarians to promote free access to students and not to aid in restricting their library materials," unquote. And while this is an admirable statement, it isn't always practical. I have 1 to 2 requests for Harry Potter from my kindergartners and young 5 students every day. Were I to grant these requests, my entire shelf of Harry Potter would be empty by the time my older students arrived for their book checkout. I have admittedly conferred with a classroom teacher about a student's reading level. It isn't unusual to have a copycat scenario in any of my classes, and I'll address this in a future episode about student checkout personalities, because parents, at least in the state of Michigan, can elect to delay their students' entry into kindergarten. This means that it's not unusual to have a year or more age difference within a class. I remember discovering that my just-turned 5-year-old kindergartner was 11 and a half months younger than one of her classmates. This is the parent's prerogative, and it has an enormous impact on when these students come to check out library books. Invariably, my oldest first graders are reading chapter books, and their classmates are all convinced they can read these books as well. This issue was addressed in episode number 3, Book Warden, and encouraging my students to find the just right book. As I read more and more articles on leveled reading, I am finding that teaching students how to find the just right book by teachers and school librarians is being vilified by some advocates of student reader choice. The suggested laissez-faire approach to student checkout will undoubtedly raise questions from classroom teachers and parents who expect the school librarian to exercise some guidance when working with our students, or they might ask, why does the school need a librarian at all? Fountas and Pinnell have come under fire as the standard by which schools level their books, and consequently, our students get leveled as well. In what I can only imagine is a PR nightmare for them, Fountas and Pinnell have been trying to reframe the conversation about leveling books. In a recent tweet, quote, "Choice is at the heart of what it means to be a confident reader. It is important to teach students how to select books for themselves rather than prescribing them by level," unquote. There is then a link to the School Library Journal article on the Just Right books, and I'll attach a link in the show notes. As someone who isn't new to this profession, can I just say that Fountas and Pinnell's clarification comes across to me as forced irony, much as when cigarette manufacturers had to post health warnings. A 2009 federal law mandated graphic warnings be posted on both advertisements, cartons, and individual packages, but I can't imagine that R.J. Reynolds Company likes the fact that they have to find themselves channeling time and resources and money into harm reduction efforts, which is counter to their single goal of selling more cigarettes. Similarly, F&P does not want to have to be backtracking and reframing their premise of the need to level books in order for students to read what is best for them. School librarians can't avoid leveling altogether. While our libraries may not be leveled, the classroom libraries often are. I remember when my own kids were in elementary school being asked to volunteer to level the classroom books with color-coded labels. And I'm not suggesting that it is the job of the school librarians to convert teachers or to challenge how their classroom libraries are organized. However, in my own efforts to support my teachers, I'm oftentimes filling in the gaps when they switch grade levels. Collaboration with teachers often means I'm providing books within a specified Lexile level or F&P letter. This episode is inspired in large part to Jennifer Gonzalez's Cult of Pedagogy podcast, episode number 84, which originally aired on December 3rd, 2017. I'll include a link in the show notes. I have enjoyed going through the archive, as I've only recently discovered this podcast. Furthermore, over the summer, many of my favorite podcasters decided to take a break from their podcasting schedule, and I've been enjoying listening to her back catalog. In episode number 84, How to Stop the Love of Reading, Jennifer interviews author Pernille Ripp. I was pleasantly surprised to hear the role of school librarians mentioned in her interview. Pernille Ripp is a staunch advocate for student choice when it comes to reading and the importance of independent reading during the school day, that we need to value reading every day. Pernille said that common sense reading instruction was losing out due to the increasing emphasis on data collection. She and Jennifer discussed the decision at schools who prioritize spending their budgets on technology and package programs rather than investing in funding classroom libraries as well as the school library. They also lamented the decision by many districts to cut their librarian. An important point was also made that we lose students' interest and the potential love of reading when we limit their choices. Another Cult of Pedagogy podcast I would highly recommend you listen to is episode number 107, What Are the Best Ways to Use Level Texts? Includes a fascinating conversation that Jennifer Gonzalez had with Jen Saravallo, the author of the book Understanding Texts and Readers, Responsive Comprehension Instruction with Level Texts. This podcast unpacked the mixed messages and confusion over the right and wrong way to incorporate level text in the classroom learning. I was especially intrigued with the importance of how we phrase what we say to students about their using their levels, and importantly, not to impose judgment, but rather encouraging words. I was also very appreciative of the suggestion that if you do choose to label your books with a level, to put those levels on the inside cover so as not to embarrass a student. Lastly, I'd like to also explore at greater length the idea of readers' identities. I think school librarians are in a wonderful place to help our students discover their reading identity as they develop into confident readers. For those of us who spend a little time scrolling through Twitter, #LetTheKidsRead, and you'll find there's an overwhelming sense that adults who teach and the parents agree that student choice is key to promoting the love of reading. I would like to thank you for listening today. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Share this podcast with other school librarians in your district and your PLN. Consider leaving a rating at iTunes, as it helps other school librarians find out about this podcast. I would like to thank Nazar Ryback at hooksounds.com for the music you've heard today. As always, I invite your feedback and your contributions. Please email me at schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. The topic of our next episode will be lifelong learners. I hope you will tune in.